Welcome to eCommerce Insights, trends, tips, and lessons learned, sponsored by Atmosol, a leading e-commerce technology company based in Chandler, Arizona and Dallas, Texas. Each month, we talk to e-commerce entrepreneurs, vendors, and experts who share their expertise, experiences, and thoughts about navigating the ever-changing world of e-commerce. Ready to get started? So are we. Join host Ram Mohan and co-host Honey Olson with today's guests.
Hi, and welcome to eCommerce Insights. Instability, issues, loss of competitive advantage, increased tech debt, failure to meet business goals. Those are just a few of the things that could happen if mistakes are made during your e-commerce build. Now, while it can be exciting to do a new build, it can also be daunting. So, if you're not familiar with the process, mistakes can be made. Unfortunately, many business owners make those mistakes when building their e-commerce site, and it can cost them time and money. Whether you're just getting started or already in the process of creating your store, our discussion today hopefully will help you ensure that you don't make any costly mistakes. So, welcome Tom Strickland, Jorge Garcia, Ram Mohan to the discussion, and let's spread some news. All right. So let's start with just telling us a little bit about yourselves, your background, and then we can get into the conversation of helping business owners. And we'll start with you, Tom.
Um, I'm Tom Strickland. I'm the solution engineer with Atmosol, and I have a development background and have moved into kind of understanding all layers of the technological side of running an e-commerce website.
Okay. Jorge?
Hi, hello, my name is Jorge Garcia, and I'm a UI, UX, and front-end developer at Atmosol. And I'm really excited to talk about some e-commerce and UX.
Okay. And Ram?
Ram Mohan. I'm the CEO of Atmosol. About 25 years in technology, various aspects. I've done technology, I've done consulting, and I run a business now. So, and done e-commerce and SaaS software primarily in my 25 years. So that's my profile.
Okay. Before we get into problems and mistakes, that always concern people, let's talk a little bit about why people should have an e-commerce site. What's important about having an e-commerce site?
Wow.
If you're selling things, how do you not have a site? Basically, at this point, I mean, unfortunately, the past few years' experience, we've learned that sometimes you have no other choice than to buy things online.
Right.
And so I think we live in a world now where we ought to be prepared, and moreover, I think people have acclimated to businesses having an online presence, and if your main business is selling products, then your online presence should be doing that. So it's, in a lot of ways, it's by default, I think, the first face that most businesses have.
Okay. So, go ahead, Jorge.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I tend to believe that one of the first things that you can do with any business is to start building their digital branding. I think it's a much simpler step to take. There's a lot of platforms and a lot of services available to help new business owners set up online stores. But it also gives you an opportunity as a business owner to start putting a little bit more time into building a digital brand, and of course starting to acclimate yourself to using customer data, user data, and delving a little bit into digital marketing.
Yeah, and traditional advantages of a local store. If you have a physical store, it's based on foot traffic, based on people who are there, from the population of the city, etc. Whereas e-commerce gives you a much larger, larger audience to reach out to. I mean, you might be a store in Phoenix or Dallas, but I mean, just talking about people that are here. But now your audience is nationwide or even worldwide, depending on how far you can ship and send the items, and so that's one of the biggest advantages that can help stores really scale, right? I mean, you're a store in a mall in Phoenix or wherever, and now you're like everywhere. So that's the other big advantage, of course.
Okay. So Jorge, you mentioned that there's a lot of platforms out there for business owners to build their e-commerce sites. So can someone just build their site themselves? I mean, do they really need a developer, designer, consultant?
Generally speaking, I think most people that start getting into building a new business are more focused on developing the business, developing their brand, and trying to get their business off the ground. Although they can start looking into building a website themselves or building an e-commerce solution themselves, there is quite a bit of overhead. And as a result, I do generally recommend that they speak to the UX experts and just visual merchandising experts, and then of course web developers to help them offset some of the work that it would take to get a store off the ground. While there is platforms that are relatively straightforward in putting together websites and putting together stores and handling a lot of the features that you would need to set up for an online shop, I think it's generally wise to look into getting some consultation in regards to getting those set up.
Okay.
I mean, I also want to say that some people, like we've seen customers who initially started off on their own store. I mean, where they were not overly concerned about whether this is the best experience, whether this is the best features, whether, am I able to sell products the way I want? Can I bundle them? They just wanted something up and running to see how it goes. At that point, they could. I mean, they could just build something, slap it together, see what, especially if you're trying out some marketing to see how many people are even coming to our site, right? I mean, forget about converting them or them buying, but at least even from an audience perspective, you can build it, but you will soon reach a point where you're hurting because you're not the expert in certain things, unless you are. But most people are not an expert, don't have expectation in, for example, user experience on what is the journey of the customer and what is the what are the things you can change that can things like eyeball tracking. Where is your button? Most people don't know that. I mean, it's very difficult to do it, and it's a specialized science. So, and also technology, right? I want to do something. Well, this platform allows this, or this is what's possible, and what else is possible. So you will reach a point where in your business where you need help, right? Unless you have a team of your own. So,
yeah, I think that as long as expectations are realistic, that it's just a very essentially minimum viable product. I have if I'm a merchant that has simple needs, my product catalog is not very complex. I'm going to be handling fulfillment myself, going down and grabbing flat rate boxes from the post office or something like that. Then yeah, you probably can get by with standing up a Shopify store on your own for a little bit. But I think we see that merchants very quickly get, big dreamy ideas in their head of what they want to have with their online presence. And I think that if that's the case, where if they're going on their own, then they're going to run into problems fairly quickly. And I think that you had said, does it require a designer, developer, or consultant? And I think that those are kind of somewhat different answers.
Mhm.
I was actually looking through the orders that I've placed as a customer in the shop app, which means it's various different merchants that I've gone to their websites and bought things. And I was looking at that and realizing, well, most of them were pretty light on design, and it looks like they were running fairly stock Shopify stores. So they might be getting by without actually having design or development going on. But I
Mhm.
imagine that they still at very least have a consultant. Because they are sort of in very niche categories. Either they have very strong word of mouth, they have a very strong existing brand outside of e-commerce, so like
Mhm.
maybe band merchandise or things like that, or they're really aggressive on social media marketing and advertising. And so like by the time you are on their site, you're basically ready to hit the add to cart button already.
Right.
And so I think in that sense, you're offloading a lot of what you might get out of the website, and you're using it mostly just for the add to cart process. But if that's the case, then you definitely need more consultants on the digital marketing side. I think the other thing is all of those merchants, and I think in general, merchants have the most success when your products are very enticing. Like if you can see a product from an ad and immediately know you want that, you don't want to hunt around on the website for anything else, you're just going to click right into it and go to the cart, then that makes it a lot easier. But the reality is that a lot of merchants can't control how enticing their products are.
So along those lines, let's get into products. So what are some of the common mistakes that merchants make on their stores when it comes to their product and their product data?
On the back end, on the product data, first and foremost, and we talked about this a little bit last month too, but making sure that you're actually selling products. A lot of times we talk to merchants that want to start an e-commerce store, but really they're selling services and ones that don't necessarily translate well to a self-serve shopping cart experience. So if you're buying, shutters for your house or something like that, you can't just, go buy those off the shelf or buy those off of, a digital storefront and expect them to work. There's a lot more involved with that, and they're not based on SKUs. So I think making sure that you're actually selling products and not selling something else is a good first step. The other one is to think about how you manage your products, and is that going to be something that works online? I know that there's a lot of people that maybe sell on Etsy or just sell to friends by word of mouth or whatever, and maybe they're handcrafting their own things or something. They're not worried about SKUs or quantities or stock or anything like that. But because of what Ram said about how e-commerce can scale so much more quickly, then merchants will very quickly run into issues if they have not worked out what those kinks are as far as how they're managing their product inventory.
Okay, and on the front end, Jorge, I mean, what mistakes could be made that potentially would lose business?
Oh, absolutely. And this is more to the point, covering some of what Tom was saying. There's a lot of instances where the way a client may set up their inventory, set up their categories, can lead to a little bit of confusion. Some of the really interesting aspects of existing e-commerce platforms that make things very helpful is that there's a lot of pre-existing user flows and interaction models that many of these platforms share. So you can set something up relatively quickly, and users can flow through product searching, product page interactions, and adding to cart. All of this stuff, these behaviors already exist within the user experience of e-commerce. So those things tend to work out really well. One of the things that can really cause an issue with that, though, is how you use the inventory and how you're setting up your categories. If a user is having a hard time finding something, if a user is running into a scenario where they have an overabundance of options, you can very quickly start creating scenarios where you're going to have a lot of cart abandonment. You're going to have issues finding products, and so those are kind of some of the things I tend to see new e-commerce installation users running into, just having a misunderstanding or just kind of going through the growing pains of setting up your inventory in a way that's palatable for users.
Yeah, and product data, when you talk about product data, we should also think about the attributes, right? Because if you think about product discovery, which is a user coming and searching for a product, one of the bigger things that I've seen, at least from consulting with companies, is what are the attributes you need to have? What are the different ways a user could search for something? And most e-commerce platforms won't show a product unless that's an attribute, or that's part of the description or something like that, or it's set up as some sort of an extension, right? So when we talk about product data, that's also very important to see that you have somebody who has experience with that product itself, or with the merchandising of that product, who can come back and say, okay, what are the things I need to relate this product to that my customers would search with, which is not very relevant when you're in a physical store, right? Because you can see it, you know what it is, there's no description to be written there. There's nothing attached to it that says, hey, this one is, related to shoes or related to this. It's evident. There's a department, there's something that guides you there. And that's something that when you're starting new, that, people from a business perspective, do you have that person who's assigned to do that kind of stuff, right? As you bring in more products, who is doing the attributes, who's making sure the search relevancy is there, all of that stuff. That's also part of product data, I think, that from a business perspective should be thought about.
When you say attributes, for someone new that's coming into e-com, may not know all of the terms yet. What exactly is an attribute?
Well, I think Tom can speak more to it than me. I'm coming from more of a technology, from what I know. Essentially, when you have a product, you set up some properties, attributes, whatever you want to call it, in the system, so that if I come in and search for a small size shoes, right? So there's a small size there. If it shows up, it comes back and shows me small something else, then that's not really very good for me, right? So it depends on one, your search product, right? What you're using for search, and how well it can actually understand language, right? Many people search more towards a natural language. Some people, tech savvy people, know not to use natural language, but some people will just search natural language, small size shoes. Does it give you small something else? Does it give you only shoes? Those are the things that are mostly driven by attributes. Now, there's a lot of tech, behind this that I don't know if you want to go into right now, but it's essential to have your attributes set up. I mean, I think, Tom, maybe you can give more examples of those. But that's my.
So I think the most obvious to consumers would be the idea of, like you said, small shoes, or size and color of shirts or things like that. And then if you look in different industries, you can get into things like, okay, well, maybe we're buying bolts for a particular application, and so you need to know what the diameter of the bolt is, and what the thread size is, and what the what the head of the bolt is, and that sort of thing. So all of those sorts of things can be attributes that might not be relative to every product that's sold online, but are going to be relative to some merchants. And so it's important that they know how to set up those attributes, and it's important that they are on a platform that will accommodate that as well.
Right.
And I think too, talking about search, that's something that I see a lot more when we're dealing with industrial merchants. Search is extremely important, because most of the people that are looking for those products know exactly what they want. And if you have your search dialed in, that, hey, I want a quarter inch diameter, 8-inch long bolt or something like that, you can type that in, and if those attributes, as Ram said, are just right, then that's going to be your first result. I think that actually kind of goes back to, like, think about what type of site you're actually wanting to run for your products, and that's an issue that I see more on the front end than on the back end. So sorry, Jorge, taking your thunder a little bit, but a lot of merchants don't might kind of fall in love with a particular theme or a particular design, and unfortunately it's just not actually well suited to what their product type is or what their market is. And so I think having the context and the experience of knowing what different types of themes work for different industries is an important step.
Absolutely.
I think that's part of Jorge's job, though, right? I mean, to recommend the right kind of theme for the kind of product. So I don't think it's thunder.
It is, unless they've come to us 8 months later and they're asking for support. So
well, something I'd love
coming
to
from
add,
somebody else.
it's something I'd love to add. I tend to look at user experience for e-commerce solutions as the opposite side of, or the similar experience that you would have when going into a physical store. A lot of the feature sets and core feature sets of any e-commerce platform are generally there, or they're in place to make the shopping experience more pleasurable and more straightforward. The way you do that is by associating products and categories to one another through attributes, through properties. Coming to the front page of a store or an online store should feel like walking into a store, and seeing the products, the categories and new products that are available is going to be a very similar experience to visual merchandising in a brick and mortar store. How those items are associated to one another, for example, if you're selling clothing, recommending clothing that would go with it, would all be part of how you set up your inventory, how those attributes are linked to one another. That would be a similar experience to a brick and mortar experience, where someone says, hey, this goes well with this, or you should try these two things together, or they're in the same place for a reason because they are generally supposed to be sold together, or they want to try to entice you to look at those products together. I think by properly associating your products through your inventory systems using attributes allows you to do that. But it also kind of gives you a good idea by viewing the data that's being generated by how your users interact with those products and those product pages and those search results. It gives you an idea of whether or not those attributes are working the way you expect them to, are presenting the additional products and categories the way you would like them to your users. I think all of those things are some of the small details about setting up a store and properly setting up your inventory to utilize all the feature sets of an e-commerce platform. Once it's all put together in a way that allows all the products and categories to talk to each other in an intelligent way, that's one of the major hurdles that a new store owner is going to have to overcome.
Well, we talked about attributes. We talked about attributes in the search box. Wouldn't it just be easier to put it all in the navigation so that people can just drill right down to where they need to go?
I want to talk about industrial products that Tom talked about.
Yeah.
Where you have like 1,000 products. So, good luck drilling through that and
Yeah.
getting the product you want. Search is, I mean, if you have few products, search may not be that important. But as your number of products increases, this is something we've seen all the time. Like, it's just very difficult. Even if you have categories, your categories end up being so many that people are confused with the categories. So especially when your inventory is large, search is, the way people will go. I mean, I want to go in and say, I want this. Yeah, in fact, many B2B products, people just want to search by item number. They know that already, right? So, that's my take.
And I do think that with the right theme that, you can accommodate at least some industrial merchants relatively well. I mean, we have experience with that. I know on the BigCommerce side of things, supermarket is a go-to theme that we've had good success with, and parts warehouse as well. I mean, it's in the name, I think. But yeah, I think that depending on the complexity, having a good search, or even getting to the point of, like Ron, like you mentioned, actually having B2B functionality to get the customers a step closer, is a good way to go for those sorts of applications.
Yeah, and I think Jorge went a little bit into it about, try this with that, right? That we're getting into product recommendations. So that's also another part of, also going back a little bit further down to, can you build it yourself, right? These are some of the things that a regular owner wouldn't even know to do, right?
No.
I mean, can I do this kind of stuff? Even if I had the technical background or whatever, or I knew something about something, many people won't even know that this is a possibility. And this is, when you're looking at a search product, many of these products provide automatically recommendations. People also looked at, which is kind of like a social, proof or whatever. And those are the kind of things that you will miss out. And earlier you're talking about, they may be able to do some things and it might just convert if it's an enticing product, etc. But what they will miss is they don't know if they're converting to the extent possible, right? Until you have people who have done this before, you're thinking, okay, I've got X% conversion, I'm good, but could it be X plus 2, right? That's you would miss too, right? And that's really important to understand that. How far can you go with that? So,
yeah, and we've run into that, like merchants that we've talked to that's like, I'm not really concerned about the mobile on my website. 80% of my traffic comes from desktop, and it's like, well, maybe that's because everybody's leaving on mobile because your website needs to be fixed. So,
right.
So what are some of the other issues that we've seen come across, especially coming on someone who's already built their store and now they're coming in for support because of issues? What are some of the mistakes that they've made that others could probably learn from?
Something I run into quite a bit is any sort of customizations being made to existing themes that aren't really taking advantage of some of the feature sets that already exist on the platform. And this is one of those scenarios where a user may want to add some functionality, add a feature, and they may find a way to do it online, or they may speak to somebody that can give them an idea of how to do it. But implementing that functionality or changing a feature may create some inefficiencies in the store, or may not utilize some of the pre-existing feature sets that could do that job, in a much more straightforward manner, and would still provide some of the feedback and some of the data that you would expect from the users that are interacting with those features. I think that overall what ends up happening is that there's going to be small details in regards to the optimization of those new features that an inexperienced developer, an inexperienced store owner would skip out on. And when it comes to e-commerce, all of that data you generate, all of the efficiency that you can have on any facet of your store should be maximized if at all possible. Especially if that goes double for mobile. So I think that's something I tend to see a lot. It's just real simple fixes that were done in a way that would ultimately kind of cause a little bit of friction on the user side or create some inefficiencies for how you're displaying the site.
Extensions, apps,
Yeah,
integrations.
Apps.
yep,
Yep.
Yeah.
And the problem is that it builds and it builds and it builds.
yes,
Every new quarter, it's another coat of paint on top, and eventually, you don't know you don't know where it started from. I think a good analogy is that we all have smartphones at this point, and we get to that point in our smartphone life cycle where it's like, how do I only have 10% storage left? And then you look and it's like, oh, I have 300 apps installed on my phone, and I like maybe use 7 of them. And unfortunately, we have seen the same sort of thing with e-commerce websites as well.
Right.
It's a lot easier to click install on an app when you think you need it, and then when you don't realize you need it anymore, you forget to go and click off of it until you know your marketing team turns around and tells you that you're getting a 13% on your page speed score.
Right.
yeah.
So
Well,
Um,
and is it just as easy as turning it off? I mean, doesn't it leave excess code and things like that? Surely could be cleaned up, right?
some apps are good at cleaning themselves up. Some apps just aren't, and unfortunately, there's probably a good correlation that if you install an app and it doesn't do what you wanted it to do, it's probably also not going to be good at cleaning up after itself.
yeah. Uh,
So yeah.
There's also a lot of instances where a plugin or an application that you add to your store does require a little bit of scripts being added to particular pages, footer scripts, header scripts that even when they're not being utilized are still hanging out inside of your markup. They're still hanging out inside of your code base. And those kinds of things still have to make calls. They still, do a little bit once those attempts to reach their own platform have failed, then they'll kind of go. But that doesn't mean that those are asynchronous calls. They could just be taking up time that
Mhm.
your user could be using to connect to load images, to load features and whatnot. So in those particular instances, my recommendation would always be if a feature is going to be added and you believe that a plugin or an app is going to solve that, I would always recommend looking into it and making sure that it's not going to create additional overhead for the users. Because so much of what a store loses comes from cart abandonment. It comes from people just from high bounce rates, and so much of that is just long page loads, which can stem from too many apps, too many plugins. Maybe those plugins are using large images that you just uploaded to their own image server, making calls to different servers and whatnot. A lot of these simple solutions have very complicated stuff going on under the hood, and that could add a ton of overhead to the
So,
users.
but what if someone wants to use large images? What if they need, because of the way that their product is, that they need those high res, super fine imagery, like fashion?
Well,
Um,
they need the technical expertise to know the best way to load those onto the page,
yeah,
because
that's
the
it.
web provides for that. Like 10, 15 years ago, it was a problem if you wanted to load 30 high res images on a page. You're going to be waiting for a couple of minutes. There are tools to do that a lot better, to optimize which images are actually loading first, and the ones that are on the top of the page will load directly in, whereas the rest will lazy load, as they
Yeah,
say, or load image placeholders to start. And all of the platforms that we work with do a little bit for that.
Right.
Particularly, they're relatively good about the product catalog, but in other places like the homepage and other content pages, landing pages, things like that, where you're more likely to encounter large images in the first place. Also, video. This is doubly true
Mhm.
for video. That's a place where you need some technical expertise to know the best way to handle that.
So I have a question, Tom. I mean, you brought up the cell phone analogy. So I was thinking, if I wanted to go and delete, let's say, my WhatsApp, right? I don't want to delete all the images that came through WhatsApp. That I want to keep. Is that a scenario in e-commerce as well, where an extension created data that you don't want to get rid of? No, you can't get rid of, at least not as easily. I can go through all my WhatsApp images and delete all the memes, but it'll take me a long time to do. So is that a case too?
Oh yeah, that is definitely the case. And in fact, yeah, there's some cases where you could be in trouble. The core functionality of your website might actually start breaking, because it was depending on not even just data, but even a class, even a bit of code that was stored into the database that, oh, hey, we're expecting to use this code, and then that code disappears, then that can break. So that's something that we see more on hosted solutions on like Magento, and because of the separation of concerns on SaaS platforms like BigCommerce and Shopify, it's less common. But yeah, that is a problem. Something that is still a problem even on the SaaS platforms, as Jorge was talking about, is that if you leave a JavaScript embed or something sitting around, even if you've turned off the app, even if that app has been deleted, even if the server that app was running on doesn't exist anymore, that's still going to be causing problems. And in fact, if it's giving you a 404 error because it can't find that resource anymore, that actually can cause more of a slowdown. At least in my experience, I've seen more of a slowdown from 404s than from actually being able to load in resources. It can even open you up to security vulnerabilities as well. Like say, you don't, especially if you don't know if you necessarily trust an application developer. Well, say, maybe the assets that they were loading onto your page, maybe their server gets taken over, and then suddenly your page is calling assets from that app that you weren't even using. That could be doing something nefarious.
We've seen that.
Yeah, all from experience.
I
remember that.
I think this speaks to the a scenario that I see happen a lot, and we generally try to explain to our some of the companies that we've worked with in the past. They probably are going to specialize in their field. Their main concern is going to be getting their business running, making sure everything's on point with their brand. It's usually a little bit easier, and it's usually quite a bit less stressful to have people that specialize in different facets of e-commerce to attack these particular things. Even just in this room currently, the knowledge that we have with UX, UI development, front-end development, marketing, digital marketing, there's different people, different professions for all of these different facets. And in the same way that you wouldn't maybe go to a brick and mortar store and decide that you're going to install this new countertop, you're going to build all of the display cases, you're going to remove the fans and add new fans and new lighting and all of these different things that would help with visual merchandising and maybe help with how you handle your inventory or even more technical aspects of your store.
Bring someone in to do it.
Yeah, you're going to bring somebody in to do some of that, because ultimately your concern should be standing up the business and running the business. Those are all full-time things. And I think many new business owners are so concerned with having a little bit of access to what's happening with their store and what's going on with their e-commerce installation that they kind of take on a little bit too much responsibility. And in many cases, they just don't have the experience or the knowledge to know what kind of vulnerabilities they can expose themselves to. And more importantly, what kind of things they're leaving on the table. Not knowing what these platforms can do and how to utilize them, that's where the expertise of e-commerce professionals tends to really shine. Because then you don't have to worry about whether or not this plugin or this app is going to create tons of problems for your store, or maybe utilizing some sort of unsecured code. Or maybe you don't really know how to set up an inventory in a way so that it will have the most impact both for your user base and for the data that you collect that will ultimately fuel the types of campaigns that you end up putting together, the types of email blasts that you send out, and the way you interact with social media. I think once you allow both the platform to utilize as much of its functionality and a group of developers and designers and digital marketing experts to help you use all that data to maximize the impact that those stores and your campaigns will have, that's when you'll really see the strength of some of these e-commerce platforms.
I think we've. Oh, sorry.
No, I just wanted to add that one thing that Jorge brought up is, e-commerce seems simple, but it's not easy to get an e-commerce store. You can get it up and running, yes, that's for sure. But no one's going to come by from that, right? I mean, you can run some Facebook ads, you can run this and that. You might get inconsistent business. To have a consistent flow of business onto an e-commerce store takes a lot, and that's why I was saying you can start off, just to test the waters. But eventually, if you want to run that business as a consistent revenue generating business, then you need help. I mean, there's no two ways about it. I mean, you can try to save as much as you want, but end of the day, that's where you want to go.
Well, and I would say, based on, just business owners, coming into it, I think a lot of people seem to think that once they have it up and running, it just runs itself. And that there, I mean, honestly, I mean, that's a lot of what we see is like, well, it's done, right? But there's so much upkeep, and and from a business owner standpoint, there's more than just e-com, like Ron was talking about. Like, how do you get the business there?
Yeah.
And what I like to, what I tell a lot of our digital marketing clients is that, we might be able to get them to your site, but if we're not helping with your site, I'm not responsible then at that point if they bounce, because I'm not managing your site. I can give you an insight. I can tell you what you should do on your site. But it's from an ownership standpoint, there's a lot more to it than just paying someone to build your store or building your store yourself and walking away.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
that you're just going to make money.
And and I think that talking about the business side, the ownership side, I think that gets to one of the things that I've seen a lot. We've talked a lot about the dichotomy of do you roll your own, or do you bring somebody in? I think there's the other dichotomy is businesses that want to think of their e-commerce solely as infrastructure, instead of, as we were talking about at the beginning, one of the core aspects of your brand. And there are ways that you can run it both ways, but you can't flip back and forth. To extend off of Jorge's analogy of a brick and mortar store, it's like, maybe you want to start a restaurant, you could start a food truck, and then you don't have to worry about the cost of, getting a building built and having inspections and all that stuff. But you also, there's going to be things that you don't have with a food truck. You can be more agile and everything like that, but you don't have a dining area. You don't have these things. You don't have a known presence that people can go to. Right. And I think likewise, we have worked with merchants, and a lot of times when maybe business ownership changes, or when a different VP comes in or something like that, they're like, oh, we're spending too much effort on the website. We need to roll that back. And then, they come back to us, 6 months, 9 months later, and wonder, well, why aren't we converting? Like, why we've put so much. We've seen some situations where maybe the e-commerce budget was 2% of the marketing budget.
Yeah.
And then they come back and wonder, why is this not converting? And as for exactly what,
I mean,
what
they have
you and Ron were saying.
tons of traffic coming to the site, but people are bouncing.
I believe that one of the major aspects of this that I find fascinating is that you'll have lots of new business owners that maybe don't look at their online shop as a large enough aspect of their business to really invest time and effort into it. And an online store, like any successful business, is generally measured through its ability to grow exponentially. So if you have like a brick and mortar store, as that store and that brand does better, you have more and more stores. That's not generally how the e-commerce solution is going to work. Mm-hmm. What you're going to want is you're going to keep on adding feature sets, making the site easier to utilize, to use, to have more members of your team handling administrative aspects of it. Maybe going through and adding new pages, adding landing pages. You're going to have a larger marketing team that's going to be creating large email blasts. And I think what ends up happening is you start seeing how you can utilize all of the aspects of that e-commerce store to do what brick and mortar stores can't, and that is have contact with your user base after they leave the store. You're going to be in touch with them via Twitter. You're going to be in touch with them via blog posts. You're going to be in touch with them via any sort of social media. Anytime you have a newsletter, anytime you have sales, you can reach out to those users, directly. And this is something that you can't really have with those brick and mortar stores.
So that also brings me to another point, Jorge, where we see a lot of people that they may do all of those things, but the content, whether it be on the digital marketing side or on their store side, is severely lacking. If you drive someone to a product page and they get to the product page and there's very little information, or maybe there's too much information, they're going to bounce. So they may have wanted that product, but then they get there and they're like, well, I don't have the answer to this, or this, or, oh my God, there's so much stuff here. I don't want to read this. And they they leave.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, I see, from the digital marketing side, and the operation side is where I see most business owners really struggling is that content side.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to how the different the different professions that make up e-commerce have to interact with one another. So you might have somebody who puts together these incredible campaigns, and they've used the data that's at their hands to reach out to all these users. But once they get to these landing pages, perhaps the content there is not following proper user flows that are going to promote conversion. So it is really important that a store owner has the type of assistance from a digital marketing expert, from an e-commerce designer, and from engineers who understand how to set up those quick one-page shots and make sure that those URLs are URLs that are going to be set up correctly, that these new pages are efficient and are looking good on different devices. And of course, that the data that from the back end, from your store, is being imported correctly to these new campaigns. It takes a lot of different team members working together to make this stuff happen, and you can definitely see it break down in specific facets of that for sure.
So we've talked a lot about the tech and the things that people shouldn't do. What about beyond tech? I mean, you build the site, and now you got to get it there. You got to get your product there. How do you do that? I mean, what do business owners miss when they're thinking about just putting their site together?
No, I was just going to go to the same thing when Jorge and everybody was saying about, reaching back out to customers, right? Even before you reach back out to customers on social media or anything else after purchase, there's one chance you have to keep them happy by delivering the product on time and in proper shape and all of that, right? So that's definitely what you're talking about. How do you deliver that product? How do you fulfill it? It's very important. And then one thing, I know that there's a lot of technology and there's a lot of other things around it, experience, etc. But one thing I will say from what I've seen from business people is that sometimes it's an afterthought, right? So when you're a brick and mortar, you just give the guy the product and you're done, right? And you start, like Tom said earlier, by going to the post office and getting some flat rate boxes and then shipping them out if your product suits that. But you'll soon run out of being able to do that, right? If your e-commerce is even moderately or even slightly successful, that's just going to be very difficult to do, right? So then fulfillment really becomes and not only is it the action of fulfillment, it's also the cost, right? So how do you do it in a cost-effective manner that I've seen many people who stop selling a certain product because it's just not cost-effective to ship, right? I mean, you can't sell a $2 product online as one and then expect that you can ship it with free shipping, which obviously everybody wants free shipping. No one wants to pay for shipping. I mean, I know people who would buy a $5,000 product but don't want to pay $20 for shipping. I won't pay $20.
and that just that goes back to the cost of ownership. So it's more than just building a website. An owner needs to think holistically about their business, not just their website. So there's the befores, the durings, the afters. Fulfillment. How am I going to manage my money? How am I going to run my reports? All of those things that I think we end up, I would say 3/4 through a build, start getting those types of questions, or are being told, oh, okay, well, we need to use XYZ to ship. And we're like, okay, well, that's going to require a whole new set of rules. So those are the types of things that I think are probably the biggest mistakes that I see business owners make, is not thinking it through before just jumping in and building a site.
I mean, it even impacts the product mix, right? Like I was saying earlier, there are people who, sometimes you only ship some of the larger items or a bundled product online through your own store, and you can ship the single items. If you want to buy this online and make it viable for me to ship it to you, you got to buy 10. That's the only way I can sell it. Or I will only sell certain products online and certain products
or drop ship.
Yeah, and those things
a lot of drop
think about drop shipping too, another option. But all of that is a shipping cost associated with every one of those. So you've got to figure out what are you going to sell. In the beginning, if you try that later on, then you made all this investment into this, and as there's also a people aspect to it, right? The guy who recommended going online now is on the hook to make it work, right? So he'd be like, I'm going to put everything. Shipping is not my problem.
Right.
So it's really important you think through that whole thing before you start. I mean, I was saying, well, the first question is we asked is why is it important to have an e-commerce site? Maybe we should also talk about when you should not have an e-commerce site, or at least not for all of your products. At least not have that expectation that I'll take my entire store and put it online, or my entire
Right.
warehouse and put it online. Right?
Or at least not yet.
Not
Like,
yet,
oh,
yeah.
you have 10,000 SKUs in your product catalog and you don't have an ERP. Maybe let's talk again in a year,
Yeah.
So.
You
But
know,
I
or at least just, the business owner comes to with, my list of, I have this and this and this and this and this. And that's when the consultant
yeah.
can come in and say, this is what you're going to need. And at that
Yep.
point, a business owner can look at the total cost and go, oh, I'm not there yet. And make decisions based on not just the cost of building the site, but everything else associated with it.
Right.
Yeah. And
Yep.
I mean, as I said, we can say, we'll build your site, sure, we'll be your developer, but as a business, that's not how we run. We want to consult. I don't use the word partner because I'm not your partner in this. I am your consultant in this. I am your guru for questions. And I think that most business owners need to kind of approach anything like that, whether it's with Atmosol or a 3PL or Avalar for their taxes.
Yeah.
Have everything lined up and ready and have those questions, and don't pull the trigger until you have it all set and you know what it is that you're looking at.
Yeah, it's especially true for, like I was talking about earlier, physical products in a store going online. At least they have a store, they have inventory there.
Right.
Now, if you think about people who are doing more on the retailer side, like who are selling through department stores and things like that, and if you're doing drop shipping to them or shipping direct to them, they don't even have the warehouses or the logistics or anything to even do that. So you now have to have warehouses. If you're a larger store, like we've had somebody who came to us who sells through a Kroger or something like that. They have one shipment that goes to Kroger. Kroger manages everything else. Even sell it online. Now is the point when you're thinking about, okay, now I need a 3PL to store inventory in different locations. I have no capability to ship from my warehouse in wherever to California, right? And shipping all the time from here is just not possible, and that's where your 3PLs come in. Your fulfillment, Amazon, another 3PL in essence also comes in, and those are things you can plan out too. There are options you have to see if that can make your direct to consumer in some cases or your e-commerce work.
Right. So taking it to fulfillment and other things, what are some of the problems that we've seen, like with integrations? Because maybe some people come to us and it's already built, and now they're jumping from one platform to the other, and maybe the due diligence wasn't done in knowing that that particular integration that they were already using doesn't work with that platform. I mean, what's the implications there? What's the fallout there that we see a lot of?
At worst, you might have to change what you're using for fulfillment. And sometimes that's taken merchants by surprise, even despite our best efforts to try to get that information. And sometimes it's a known thing. We'll see this with fulfillment, and we'll also see it with payment methods too.
Right.
Which for a lot of merchants is not a huge deal, but for some merchants that's super critical. But yeah, I think it goes back to I think especially it's probably a bigger issue for merchants that have been doing kind of business as usual, maybe even on a previous e-commerce store for a while, that they're taking their entire operations for granted. They're
Mhm.
not thinking about what goes into it. And so we'll ask, and it's like, okay, you only use UPS and FedEx for shipping? Like, you're sure that's all that you use? And they'll say, yeah. And it's like, you don't use, freight or or LTL or anything like that, and they'll say sure, and then they'll have a different word in their head for it, and they'll get
Yeah.
90% through the project and go, oh, how are we going to handle this sort of thing?
Right.
So like if you're doing it yourself, you've got a lot of questions to ask yourself. If you're doing a replatform or building a new platform, if you're working with a consultant on a replatform or building something new, really listen to the questions, because our goal is to have those, to find those hard problems at the beginning,
Right. Right.
so there's no surprises.
Yeah, I mean, even integrations, other integrations. You talked about fulfillment and about payments, but even to your ERP, even to other systems, accounting. I mean,
Hmm.
you may be able to do without it, right? Sometimes people say, you know what, I'm just going to do double entry. Take it from here and put it there. Take it from here and put it there, right? It's possible.
Hmm.
I mean, for the short term, it is possible, but having that plan in place, and rather than realizing it after the store launches, oh, how do I get this from here to there, is also what a consultant does, because it's not easy. Again, I will say this again, that people think it's just, I can just run up a Shopify store and be up and running. No, it's there's, I mean, it's very small businesses maybe, but as you're a little larger, there is a lot of things that has to happen that you might not even think about in the beginning, which is why, and I mean, it looks like I'm selling our company, or selling ourselves by saying, hey, get a consultant. It's not that. It's just that there's definitely going to be things that you miss that a consultant will, whatever you pay the consultant will definitely pay for himself or herself. So that's I don't want to conclude with that, but that's really a plan is necessary across the thing. I think that's what we should conclude with. At least I will, is that think of every aspect of it. That's what we've been talking about. All of the things that we spoke about. You need to have a plan around everything. And if you know how to do that, you can get input from specific people into doing that, then that's great. You can build your own plan. It's not possible. But definitely ask those questions in every area that we discuss about. And at least I hope this podcast will help some people at least look at all the things that you need to look at, and put that into an Excel sheet and say, hey, who knows this stuff? Let me ask somebody who's responsible for this to tell me how you're going to do this, right? At least that level of planning would be great.
Right. Well, and I think, something too is, if someone's looking at replatforming, make a list of all of the problems that you ran across on your current platform, because either you're going to have those same problems because it's less about a platform and the technology, or you're going to find that the platform you're going to is going to fix the problem or it's going to make it worse. But, coming to the table with, I had problems with this and this and this and this, that's where a consultant's going to be able to tell you whether or not the platforms you're looking at are going to be even moderately helpful, or, that, it's more about, the way your business is set up and less about the infrastructure of the technology you're using. So, I mean, beyond, making a list of everything that you need to do to run your business, is, if you're replatforming, make a list of everything that caused you problems, and ask about those things.
Sometimes it's implementation too. We've talked to people too that they're going, oh, we want to replatform because of A, B, C, and D, and we're like, the platform you're on actually should do all of those things relatively well.
Right.
So, which might make it easier when we get to that point of that conversation. So,
and I think that kind of speaks to the idea of making sure that the people you're working with are going to be able to tell you that. Sometimes, you may have teams that would just recommend a replatform without really looking into it. But when you have e-commerce experts, they might have some knowledge of feature sets that you might not be utilizing that could help solve these problems, or just a good enough understanding of the platform to make sure that you get back to a situation where it's fulfilling the needs of your business.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, I think this is close to wrap up. So I want to appreciate everybody's time today, and thank you for joining us and sharing your wisdom. Considering that we're all from Atmosol, the easiest way to get a hold of us is either call us, or you can email us. And of course, if you're coming through the podcast, all of our information will be there. But if someone has specific questions, say on the technical side of it, they would probably want to reach out to Tom, business consultant, those types of things. Ram is going to be your best bet. And I'm pretty much a catch-all. So if you just look for someone and you can get a hold of me, and I'll help you on the path forward. So and again, I want to thank you all for your time, and we hope that any of you listening to this now or later, that you walked away with some information that might help you in your journey. And if you have more questions, please feel free to reach out to us, or if it's not us, work with another consultant. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to E-Commerce Insights presented by Atmosol. We hope you have learned something new or took a nugget of information away to help you as you travel the world of e-commerce. Until next time, keep asking questions, evolving your business, and learn every day.